Scaling tends to expose cracks in the foundation a lot faster than what the revenue growth is. You can't outpace with revenue what your operations can support. You talk about those two areas in particular, you're talking about your cash flow. And cash flow is king when you're talking about scaling as an independent in particular. One of the exercises, if I can talk about that briefly, would be looking at a question you can ask yourself is, where do I want to be in 5 years? And if you've got that end in mind, what would have to be true for you to achieve that next year? When you shorten that time frame, it puts a different perspective on where you are right now and areas of focus.
Right.
So if you want to be a $100 million distributor 5 years from now, what would have to be true today to achieve that? And do my processes support that?
Hey everyone, excited to have Jason Dierks with me today. Jason Dierks is Executive Vice President, Operations at Tool Supply Group. Jason has spent years helping industrial distributors scale operations, navigate acquisitions, improve profitability, and drive growth in highly competitive markets. So Jason, really excited to have you here. Would love to learn from you a lot about the industry. I'm sure listeners are looking forward to hear from you. Just to start off, you've spent years in this industry. What's kind of been some of your big learnings? What's been your journey like? I think that'll be a great point to start.
I think the journey is interesting when you go from the size of a distributor that I started with to the organization that I work with today. The scale going from a distributor that was in the teens in terms of millions in revenue to now a distributor that is in the $1 billion market. And lessons over the years of learning what that's like to scale. And at the end of the day, how similar the businesses are when you really get down to what matters in distribution.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that journey. A lot of our listeners are part of distribution companies which are looking to kind of break the 100 million mark. Many distributors kind of want to do that, but a lot of them, from kind of my conversations with him, feel kind of stuck around the 20 to 30 million mark. What's kind of what are kind of the big things that break when somebody wants to really scale and get to that 100 million mark? What's been your experience there, Jason?
It's interesting because it doesn't necessarily follow the same ratio of scale when you talk about the things that break. So when you look at scaling, some of the things will break faster than what the revenue growth is. Scaling tends to expose cracks in the foundation a lot faster than what the revenue growth is. You can't outpace with revenue what your operations can support. So some of the first things that start to show up are AR issues. That DSO number, when you start to scale, becomes that much more important because you're relying on that for leverage, basically. And if you've got a poor AR process in place, it just starts to spiral that much faster. Your inventory control is the same way. When you talk about those two areas in particular, you're talking about your cash flow. And cash flow is king when you're talking about scaling as an independent in particular. So those are the kind of the stress tests that you have to look at to make that streamlined as possible. And do you need to increase your headcount at the same rate, or do you have processes that are truly scalable? Some of the other considerations, I guess, would be what your technology platform looks like. Is it really a scalable platform? And think of some of the other areas, but I guess one of the exercises, if I can talk about that briefly, would be looking at a question you can ask yourself is, where do I want to be in 5 years? And if you've got that end in mind, what would have to be true for you to achieve that next year? When you shorten that time frame, it puts a different perspective on where you are right now and areas of focus.
Right.
That's what you should measure against, and that's what your processes should support. So if you want to be a $100 million distributor 5 years from now, what would have to be true today to achieve that? And do my processes support that? If not, that gives some clarity when you ask that question. The other thing I would look at is just your overall leadership structure. Is, do you have the right players in the right positions to truly execute? Or do you have a team that requires a lot more direction? The larger you get, the more you have to rely on that team and build out that team. So identifying those individuals and putting them in positions to succeed quickly is key in any scaling.
Yeah, I mean, great insights, Jason. Thanks for that. And we see that at Vserve quite often. We work with a great example. You mentioned AR is we went to one of the mid-sized distributors, about 50, 55 million. They're really looking to grow, and they had an AR of about $2 million, which were like under $2,000 of invoices, and nobody cared to tackle them. And then we proposed a AI plus offshore kind of model and tackle those. And those are kind of like great examples of, hey, if you don't take care of that, that's going to be a leakage, and that kind of gets bigger and bigger as you grow. And if you don't have a process to tackle those kind of issues, you're just going to suffer as you grow, and the problems are just going to get magnified, and the challenges are going to become bigger. I totally agree with you there, Jason. Great point.
It completely compounds, because when you're not addressing that, most distributors are going to be going into some sort of an operating line at that point, and your credit your interest expense line on the P&L just continues to take that hit. So it hits you on multiple fronts, and if you don't address it, it just continues to spiral. So you bring up the AI agents in that. AR is an area that is particularly ripe for an agentic approach to AI, because there's things that are very easy to identify in terms of missed invoices that you can automatically send out to customers, DSO statistical trends that can measure against a customer's historic, that gives you some leading indicators of when customers are starting to turn a corner, positive or negative, in terms of their payables. And then you can actually take the next step in that of, what are we doing with our invoice terms to customers, and doing some evaluation on that. So that you're dead on with regard to the agent approach, in particular in AR. That's an area of focus right now that I'm looking at.
Awesome. You also spoke about leadership and kind of the change that needs to come about from a leadership perspective. So how do you look at your teams, as you grew, let's say from under 100 to over $1 billion? So what kind of journey did your teams have to make, and their leadership skills and their kind of approach to their work? How do you do you take them along? Do you replace people? What's kind of been your approach there, Jason?
Honestly, it's been a combination. It's not an exact science when you're talking about individuals, but the team that we have here right now is very strong in terms of recognizing what the overall objective is. When you roll up a lot of independent distributors, like has been done here, breaking that mindset of the regional distributor approach is difficult, and we've worked on that. We meet regularly. We do quarterly goal setting as a team to continue to reinforce what those corporate goals are, and our overall goals versus what's best for this region or that region. And getting people on board with that is key. The other thing when you're talking about a roll up or scale like this is you have to prioritize. So having a strong leader in terms of a CEO that can drive down to say, these are the 4 or 5 primary objectives that we need to reach and what we want to focus on. If everything's a fire, nothing's a fire, and it's very easy to let those fires take over your day. So one of the things that we've focused on is, how do we put our people in a position and work with them on keeping the number one thing the number one thing. We talk about a 60-60 one approach, where what's the number one thing? I want you to spend the next 60 days, first 60 minutes of the next 60 days focused on that. And in distribution, there's very little that happens in that first part of the day that requires immediate attention. You're not talking about vendor cutoff times at the end in the afternoon. You're not talking about whatever fire might come up. You can easily spend the first 60 minutes of the day focused on one thing. And really, if it doesn't take 60 days, great. You check that off and move to the next step. So we try to prioritize in that manner. We try to identify what are the key steps in whatever process we're looking to improve, and those are the steps that they work on in that time. So strong leadership in terms of goal setting, priority setting, and making sure people are staying on
Sure,
that.
sure. Great ideas. Love that, Jason. Organizations have access to millions of dollars of IT spend. They often go out and buy, bright, fancy widgets, but only a few of them actually truly make the operational transformation using these tools. A lot of them kind of miss the boat, and that kind of goes back to some of the scaling challenges they have. So, how do you achieve operational excellence? I know technology is a big piece of it, but what are some of the other things you look at as you kind of look at scaling and operational excellence, Jason?
Well, you bring up IT. It's an interesting tipping point right
Hmm.
now, and one that I'm sure you are dealing with on a daily basis. You don't want the technology making all your business decisions. You want the technology to work for you instead of you modifying everything to the technology. And you don't want 100 different platforms. But we're at an interesting tipping point where, with the development through vibe coding and the things that you can do with vibe coding, there are some simple things that distributors can create on their own to help drive
Right.
efficiencies. But what is the overall approach, and is it a unified approach, or are you just creating a series of individual components? So it's something that, when you evaluate your overall IT, keeping an eye on what that trend looks like today is really key. We're doing a combination,
Mm.
honestly. We've engaged, we continue to build out through our ERP system, and we modify where we need to our approach, and we're combining that with some of the vibe coding abilities that are out there to create some custom solutions at the same time.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. I think the future is a combination of, hey, where's the human in the loop and how much play he's going to have, and then where are you going to use the tokens, and what's kind of the combination between the humans and the tokens, and that's kind of the mix and match that we also trying to do with our distributors as well. And it's a great combination because it's still, like you said, technology can't run on itself. You need the people to optimize it, and then that kind of equation seems to be constantly changing with some of the innovations that are coming up. So I guess it's interesting times for us. Yeah.
And I think distributors need to be careful too, especially the smaller you get. To There's an arrogance in, "Oh, I've got an idea for this," or "I want it to do this." Being open to what else is out
Mhm.
there, and to not closing the door to third party solutions and other groups that have ideas, even at scale. That's a danger that we constantly have to balance, that we may not have all the answers internally, and we need to continue to go outside of the
Yep.
bubble to make sure that we're not missing something. We're part of a large organization, which also
Mhm.
helps.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I think that there are new developments almost literally every week, and it's hard to bring in all the capabilities in house, and that's kind of one of the plays that we do, where we're able to kind of bring in the experts from across the world to kind of solve your problem in the way that you feel is most appropriate. So that point makes a lot of sense, Jason. So just kind of moving on in terms of operational issues for leaders. What are some of the operational issues which you've seen have a big impact in terms of growth, margins, customer experience? What are some of the blind spots when it comes to distributors in these areas that you kind of frequently see as they try to scale, Jason?
We've talked before about
Hmm.
pricing. I would say pricing is an area in particular that is important to make sure you have the right processes in place. This is an extremely dynamic market right now in terms of price increases that we're seeing from suppliers. So being able to handle those, and not just handle them uh,
Hmm.
quickly, but be able to capitalize on
Hmm.
them. And when I say capitalize, I mean this is an opportunity to regain some of that margin that erodes over the course of a pricing cycle from a supplier, and to be able to do that in a way not that isn't about getting the customer, quote unquote.
Hmm.
It's about achieving fair margins and doing so in a way that is a sustainable customer relationship where it continues to build a long-term relationship. That's something that's smaller it's harder for the smaller distributors, but even for the large, the number of price increases coming through these days, in particular, if you're selling cutting tools like we do, the tungsten market has created a situation that I haven't seen in 30 plus years in the business myself. So that's a pitfall area that exposes a lot and can really lead to incredible margin erosion and put some distributors out of business pretty quickly if they are not in a position to handle that.
Yeah, totally agree. And how do you kind of keep track of pricing? What's going to be in your approach? How do you kind of evaluate the ecosystem? What's kind of been your approach there, Jason?
When we look at pricing, we do so on a we use pricing sensitivity and pricing visibility as measures, and rather than taking a across the board sort of discount, we're looking at the items that are being purchased and sold, and we're doing so at the customer level. So we're making decisions based on the sensitivity of the item. And when we talk about price sensitivity, you're talking about kind of four factors. What's the unit price? Is it a high or a low priced item? How recently was it bought? How often is it being bought? And in what quantities? Those four factors are all determine the sensitivity to the end user, and there's an additive value in that gives you some feedback on what you can do with that. When we talk about price visibility, that's more of a measure of how in tune to a specific price are we. So sensitivity and visibility are similar factors, but they have different impact. So an example, if you'll indulge me for a minute, that we use is when you talk about your car, you are probably pretty sensitive to the price of that car because you're spending a high dollar amount. You didn't buy it recently, most likely. You don't buy it frequently, and so the other factors that we talked about are pretty low, but that one unit price is significant. So your price sensitivity is very high. Your visibility, on the other hand, you probably have an idea within a few $1,000s of what you want to spend, but you don't know to the dollar or certainly not to the penny. So it's a high sensitive, low visibility item. Now think about the car, the gas that you're putting in the car. You buy it all the time. You buy a lot of it. You bought it recently. All those factors are high, even though the unit price is relatively low, but you are highly sensitive to it because of the other factors, and your visibility is extremely high. You probably know to the penny what it was per gallon the last time you filled your car. So two different ends of the spectrum, both high sensitivity, one low visibility, one high visibility. Where we focus a lot of our energy, not a lot of our energy, but where we focus is, okay, now let's talk about the oil change, continuing the analogy. You're not doing that frequently. The price point is kind of a medium range. You probably have an idea within $20 plus or minus what you're going to spend on that oil change, right? You don't know to the dollar, most likely. What does that mean to the oil change business? They've got that range, which is direct impact on their profitability. It's bottom line. So if they're $10 less than what we probably could have supported because we aren't that sensitive or visible to it, that's 10% out of their bottom line. So the question is, how are you applying that in your business? Do you evaluate your customer sales in the same manner? Or are you just taking an across the board approach that this is the target margin we want to be at for this customer? Or are you actually evaluating what they're buying and using that sort of logic and applying it on a daily basis to your account base? I can assure you we see it in our daily lives, and most of us just miss that. But when you start thinking about that automotive analogy, you can go down that when you talk about the big box home improvement stores. They all have a similar approach when you think about that contractor walking in versus you going in for your one-off DIY project. They're getting different discounts because they're buying more of it. So we see it in our daily lives. We just tend to not apply it when we get into our distribution business, but the opportunity is there, and that's where margin improvement can really come from.
Sure. Yeah, love the analogy to the car, Jason. And they say, wisdom simplifies, and you did exactly that. You kind of made it easy for everybody to understand, and really appreciate that. But totally agree that pricing is super important. What are your thoughts about value addition that some of the distributors are trying to do to kind of move away from some of the pricing wars and pricing pressures that are going on? What's kind of been your experience? How should industrial distributors view that, Jason?
Distribution continues to probably
Hmm.
evolve. Some people will say change, but at the end of the day, relationships are still drive a lot of our business. And so that relationship is often based on a differentiator. So value-added services are where a lot of that comes in. Are you technical, or does your website lend itself to easier interaction? Those are the areas that, what is your differentiating factor? If you can't really define that and be able to verbalize that in a 30-second speech, then that's an area that you need to focus your attention and be able to define that. Because if all you have is price to sell on, you can scale, but your margin is never going to get better. It's going to be that much harder to
Yep.
scale, and you just don't have an argument when you go into a new territory with that outside of price cutting.
Sure.
Suppliers don't like it. It doesn't serve the customer long term either.
Sure. And I'm sure your investors not going to like it, from an ROI perspective as well.
Certainly
Yeah.
not.
Segueing into the investment side of things, I'm sure you worked with a number of private equity firms and worked on several deals. So I'd love to kind of understand from you what's important for a PE player when he's looking at kind of roll ups, looking at industrial distributor. What are some of the things that distributors should keep in mind when you're looking to participate in some of those efforts?
I think more than anything, it's what I just mentioned. What is the differentiator for this company? Because in a roll up, there's the everyday. What's their inventory situation? How's their AR? Can we capitalize on consolidation of some back end functions if it's part of a roll up group? Those are the natural pieces that exist there, but that's going to exist in most businesses. The ones that are truly built for scale and that get the most attention are where there is a differentiator. Value-added services, coming back to that, is something that I continue to hear from PE people, is we're looking for something that differentiates on a service level. So it's that revenue is stickier. It's got a stickiness to it that they can build on, and what it needs is some capital investment to help, whether that's going into a new territory or the next acquisition to roll in to take advantage of greater scale. So it probably the number one thing is, what's the differentiator?
Yep, makes sense. Makes sense. A lot of sense. Just kind of taking on that topic of differentiation. One of the things that a lot of distributors are working on is AI, and we spoke about that briefly. What's been your experience in terms of AI initiatives? There's a lot of hype, but there's a lot of reality as well. There's the real benefits to be had. So how are you viewing it? How much of AI do you think is going to be, penetrating this industry? What should distributors be preparing for?
Well, first, I'd say it's not what's going to be penetrating the industry, it's what's already penetrated that.
Mhm.
Saw an interesting study the other day about the engagement in AI being correlating to the size of the company. So on a smaller scale, they're kind of wading into it still, using ChatGPT for emails or for putting together some policy or a response. The other two areas that we've already talked about briefly would be, the applications. What are some of the things that you can be doing with vibe coding, as I mentioned,
Mhm.
to help streamline some things? But even that is dangerous. Not maybe not dangerous, but misses the full picture. If what you're looking at is how do I automate this current process, you probably aren't evaluating the full cycle. So play that movie forward, and what is the next thing that impacts? So you might be solving your problem, but are you solving the entire process? I liken that to 3D printing. If what you're doing is 3D printing a current, to a part that previously existed, you probably are missing out on some additional capability or engineering benefit that 3D printing can enable that a prior process couldn't take advantage of. So you've got to evaluate it and say, are we actually automating the right thing? The agent approach, it's easy to look at that and say, well, I'm going to take this AR, like we talked about, I'm going to take this AR position and create an agent to do that. But are you limiting it to just what the AR person is currently doing, or are you taking full advantage of what that agent capabilities are to also interact with the system and adjust terms as they need to be adjusted without interaction? What are some of the decision making that goes beyond what a human's capable of right now? So taking full advantage, not just looking at what you're doing right now, but looking at what you could be doing with the technology is an important step.
Sure, makes sense. So we spoke a lot about AI. We also spoke about operational excellence, technology, your pricing. But let's say you kind of put all of this together, and say 5 years down the line, what would differentiate top performing distributors from the mediocre ones in your mind, Jason? Where do you think the industry is going?
I come back to leadership. People will only follow if they know where you're going. And so having leadership that is able to define that and really guide that, getting the right team in place for it. I don't think that's changed in centuries now, but it continues to be important. And then a recognition in that technologies is a tool. So as I mentioned before, are we fully changing what we do to meet technology, or are we using technology to leverage what we do well? And I think the winners are going to be the teams, as always, that have the best leadership, the best goal setting, and how to execute in that with proper leadership. But at the rate of change of technology, if you aren't fully leveraging that, you are going to be left behind quickly, because every day is something new. And the event horizons for these things, at even a year ago, you had 5 and 10-year event horizons that are already moved up to in the next year because of the rate of technology change that we can't even predict it fast enough for how fast that rate is.
Yeah, totally understand and totally agree with you. Makes a lot of sense, Jason. So as we kind of move towards the end of the podcast, just want to have I have a few questions which are quick rapid fire. So feel free to address it whichever way you would like. If you're ready, what's one widely accepted belief in the distribution industry you think is wrong?
That the industry continues to change, or that the industry is not what it used to be. The industry, at the end of the day, is very similar to what it used to be. It's still based on relationships and making it easy for the customer to buy product. That's the best way to sell. Make it easy to buy. Any other changes outside of that are just that. They're outside of what the key is. Key is growing your business, and that happens through relationships and making it easy to buy.
Makes sense. Thanks for that. What's something distributors spend too much time worrying about?
The market in general. If you're basing your business on what happens with the market instead of how you're going to go out and gain market share, and what new areas can you get into, you're at the mercy of something else. Be the captain of your own ship and make decisions based on how to gain market share and how to grow, as opposed to worrying about the market.
Makes sense. What's an advice you hear repeatedly that you disagree with in the industry?
I think you've got me a little bit on that.
Take time.
One interesting one from a supplier standpoint is suppliers that want to reward you simply with providing a deeper discount to you. Oftentimes that just means, actually, at the end of the day, less margin dollars, because if your pricing structure does not support a listless approach, that deeper discount ends up bleeding over and eventually being given to the customer. So the idea that a deeper discount is always the answer and a reward for a distributor from a supplier is not accurate. There are other ways to reward the supplier, whether that's or the distributor, whether that's rebate programs, more attractive invoice terms, consigned inventory from the supplier. Look at the full relationship, and rather than just the discount.
Great. I think that's those are some great answers, Jason, and and some great insights throughout the podcast. Really appreciate it. Is there a question that I should have asked you that I haven't asked yet?
I think there's one area in particular on the IT front, and I'm interested in what your opinion of this is. The rate of change with websites. Uh, we've gone from certainly a informational sort of foundation to an e-commerce based economy, basically. But the rate of change of the technology of websites, it's fast approaching now, where rather than having a store, you're going to have sub-stores. So you're going to have a website when you go to, whether it's Nike or whoever that is, your individual store. It's going to be customized. When you log in, it will have a store specific to you based on your buying habits through that. How do distributors take advantage of that? And I guess I would put that back on you, because that's something on our horizon of how are we going to be responsive to changing website capabilities and how best to serve our customers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you brought up there, Jason. And we put a lot of kind of thought cycles into that. Our kind of approach has been, hey, how are we going to market our customers better to the bots, right? So our kind of hypothesis is every individual is going to have a bot who's going to go out and do the research at the first level, and we really have to kind of sell to the bots first. And we're doing a lot of work kind of figuring out, hey, how do you present information? How do you stand out from your competition? There's different fancy terms for it. There's agentic engine optimization and so forth. So our approach has been first selling to the bots. So you kind of get yourself in front of the customer, the physical customer, and then once you get there, then it's going to be customization to the unit of one. And like correctly put it, we're going to have a unique store for them, understanding their buying habits, getting information from their bots. So I think that's kind of where we're moving fast, but it's still a lot of work in progress. And like you rightly pointed out, it's exciting times. It's changing. Things are changing so fast. Our AI developers go obsolete almost every 3 months. They have to go out and relearn the next new tool. So we're working hard on that as well. But it's a great point that you brought up. And it's something that's food for thought for all the distributors to think about on, hey, how are we going to sell to the bots? How are we going to, customize our solutions to that customer who has more information than ever before, has more access to tools than ever before to, massage that information and get the right insights that he wants. So it's definitely a challenge and a massive opportunity for all of us in the industry, Jason. Yes.
I understand, and I hear that.
Thank you so much, Jason. I think it was a great conversation. Really, thank you for your time. You spoke about how industrial distributors could scale in this industry. You spoke about operational excellence, which is all about small decisions, right technology, right pricing, right governance, and the right leadership team, bringing some great results for our industrial distributors. So I'm sure our distributor audience would learn a lot from this conversation. And if you have any last message that you want to pass on with your contact information or anything at all, you could go ahead, Jason.
No, I just appreciate and enjoy speaking with you the last couple times we've spoken, and I hope that that people do get something out of this, even if it's just a small piece.
All right. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, everyone.